The year was 1865. The war that tore America apart had ended. Guns were silent. The smoke of battle had lifted. And for the first time, millions of black men, women, and children were no longer slaves. They stepped into freedom with nothing in their hands but hope. But freedom raised a new and dangerous question: what now? They had no homes, no money, no land. Many had only the clothes on their backs. Families searched for a place to start a new life. And then, like a miracle, a promise came. A man named General William T. Sherman, one of the Union's top commanders, walked through the ruins of the South. He saw the freed people following his army, hungry, desperate, but full of fire. And he made an order, Special Field Order Number 15. This order was not small. It was history-changing. It said that every freed black family would receive 40 acres of land taken from the rich slaveholders of the South. Land near the coast of Georgia and South Carolina. Land that was fertile, land that could grow crops, land that could feed generations. For many black families, this promise was more than land. It was a chance at real freedom. Because true freedom is not just walking away from chains. True freedom is being able to stand, to build, to own something that no one can take away. When word spread, joy rose like fire. Families shouted, sang, and prayed. For the first time, they dreamed of a future where their children could run across fields that belonged to them. No master. No overseer. No whip. The people believed the promise. They called it 40 acres and a mule. It was the mule that made the dream complete. With a mule, a farmer could plow the soil, grow food, and start a business. Together, land and mule meant survival, dignity, and wealth. And in that moment, America seemed ready to finally give justice to the people it had enslaved for centuries. But what no one knew then was that this promise was already marked for betrayal. For a short time, the dream looked real. Thousands of freed people began moving onto the land that Sherman had promised. They built homes out of wood and mud. They planted crops. They dug wells. They created communities full of music, laughter, and hope. The coast of Georgia began to look different. Black families worked their land with pride. They named towns. They built schools. They said, "At last, we are free." But in the distance, trouble was coming. White landowners, the same ones who had once owned slaves, were angry. They wanted their land back. To them, the sight of black families farming and owning property was an insult. And in Washington, D.C., the new president, Andrew Johnson, was listening. Johnson was no friend to black freedom. He believed the South should be forgiven, and that white landowners should keep their power. While freed people were still celebrating their new lives, Johnson was already writing their betrayal. Imagine it. A father holds his child and says, "This land is ours now. You will grow up free." A mother plants seeds, believing her children will eat from her own soil. Neighbors build a church where they can worship without fear. And then, only months later, soldiers arrive. The same government that gave the land now takes it back. Families are told to leave. Their houses are torn down. Their fields are burned. The land is returned to the very men who once enslaved them. The promise of 40 acres dies almost as quickly as it was born. But in 1865, no one could see this ending yet. In those early months, all they saw was hope. For once, the future looked possible. A future where black families could own land, build wealth, and pass something down to their children. The dream of 40 acres was more than dirt and soil. It was justice. It was payment for centuries of chains. It was proof that America could finally keep its word. But history was preparing its knife. Because the dream was too powerful. Too dangerous for those who wanted black people to stay poor, weak, and dependent. And soon, the soldiers' boots would march across the fields once more. not to bring freedom, but to take it away. The 40-acre promise was real. Families touched it with their hands. They lived on it. They built on it. They believed it. But behind the dream was a lie. A lie that America would spend generations hiding. And when the betrayal came, it would not only steal land, it would steal futures. The story of 40 acres was not the story of land. It was the story of what happens when a nation makes a promise, then tears it away. And in 1865, as freed families worked the soil and built their homes, they had no idea that the greatest betrayal of their lives was already marching toward them. The land was theirs. But not for long. The dream was alive. But it was already dying. Because in America, freedom had always come with chains hiding in the shadows. And soon, those shadows would fall across the fields of Georgia and South Carolina. This was the beginning of the 40-acre lie. Imagine this. You wake up on land you were promised. You see your children running across the field. You hear the sound of crops growing. For the first time in your life, you are not a slave. You are a landowner. You are free. But then, one morning, soldiers appear on the horizon. They march with guns and papers in their hands. They are not here to protect you. They are here to take everything away. This is what happened to thousands of black families in 1865. When the Civil War ended, freedom had a price. America gave hope, but it also gave betrayal. The promise of 40 acres and a mule had filled the hearts of freed men and women with joy. They built homes. They planted seeds. They believed their children would finally grow up in a world without chains. But power in Washington had already shifted. President Abraham Lincoln, the man who ended slavery, was gone. He had been shot and killed in April 1865. And in his place stood Andrew Johnson, a man who wore the title of president but not the spirit of justice. Johnson was a Southerner. He had owned slaves himself. He did not believe in equality. He wanted to forgive the Confederates, the same men who fought to keep slavery alive. And he wanted them to keep their land, their power, and their wealth. So when black families began farming the land promised by General Sherman, Johnson made his choice. He tore the promise apart. With a stroke of his pen, Johnson canceled Sherman's order. He returned the land to the very men who had once whipped and chained black people. Overnight, families who thought they finally owned land were told, "You must leave. This land was never yours." Soldiers enforced the command. They ripped down fences. They destroyed homes. Families were thrown into the dirt. Women cried. Men tried to resist but had no weapons, no power, no protection. Children watched as the land they had just called home was stolen from them. The promise of 40 acres was dead. But the betrayal went even deeper. Without land, many freed people had nowhere to go. They were forced into a cruel new system called sharecropping. On paper, it sounded fair. A black family could farm a white man's land in exchange for a share of the crop. But in reality, it was slavery by another name. The landowner controlled everything: the seeds, the tools, the prices. At the end of the year, the black farmer often owed more than he earned. Debt tied families to the land, trapping them for life. They worked from sunrise to sunset, yet remained poor, powerless, and broken. The dream of land ownership, of freedom through farming, was replaced with endless labor for someone else. This betrayal cut deep. Because land is not just soil. Land is power. Land is wealth. Land is the ability to pass something to your children. White families in the South kept their plantations. They rebuilt their wealth. They passed their land from father to son, mother to daughter. But black families were left with nothing. No land. No wealth. No inheritance. Just empty hands and broken promises. Generations later, this loss would still echo. The gap between white wealth and black poverty began here with the theft of land that had been promised and then stolen. But in 1865, families could only feel the pain of betrayal in real time. Picture it. A man kneels on the soil he was told was his. His children ask, "Why must we leave?" His wife cries as soldiers drag them away. Behind them, a white landowner smiles as his property is returned. The promise of freedom was turned into humiliation. The 40 acres could have changed history. It could have built strong black towns, farms, and businesses. It could have ended poverty before it began. But America chose betrayal. And yet, not everyone gave up. Some freed people tried to stay. They hid in forests. They moved inland. They built small communities wherever they could find space. They said, "If America will not keep its promise, we will build our own." But the power of the government and the greed of landowners was too strong. Most were pushed into poverty, into labor, into a system designed to keep them down. The 40-acre dream was slipping away. But here is the truth: dreams do not die so easily. Even as the land was stolen, the memory of the promise burned inside every family. They remembered Sherman's order. They remembered the fields they once touched. They remembered the taste of freedom, even if only for a short time. The lie did not erase the dream. It only made it stronger. And so, as America celebrated the end of slavery, another shadow was born. A shadow of betrayal. A shadow that would stretch across decades. A shadow that would still darken the lives of black families today. The promise of 40 acres was stolen before it truly began. But the wounded left would never heal. Imagine 2 children in 1865. One is white. His father owns land, acres of fields, strong fences, a fine house. That child will inherit wealth, education, and safety. He will grow up knowing he belongs. The other child is black. His father fought for freedom, but has no land. No farm. No mule. His family was promised 40 acres, then robbed of it. That child will grow up working someone else's soil, trapped in debt, trapped in poverty. This is the price of America's broken promise. Land is more than dirt. Land is power. Land builds futures. Whoever owns land controls food, money, and opportunity. With land, families can build homes, open businesses, and pass wealth down to their children. But without land, families are stuck in survival. Every day is a fight just to eat, just to live. When President Andrew Johnson gave land back to ex-slaveholders, he did not only betray freed black people in that moment. He cut off generations of wealth before they could begin. He wrote poverty into their futures. And that poverty became a chain stronger than iron. By 1870, only a tiny fraction of black families owned land. Most were locked in sharecropping or working for wages so low they could never escape. Meanwhile, white families held onto their land and grew richer. They used banks, laws, and the government itself to protect their property. America had created 2 paths. One for white families, where land built wealth and wealth built power. One for black families, where betrayal built poverty and poverty built silence. The 40 acres were never just about farming. They were about fairness. They were about balance. And by stealing that chance, America created the wealth gap that still haunts the nation today. The price of the broken promise showed itself everywhere. Without land, black families had no schools of their own. Children often worked in fields instead of learning to read. Without wealth, black people had little protection in courts. Judges and laws favored white landowners. Even churches, the heart of black communities, struggled without stable ground to stand on. And then came violence. White groups angry that freed people were trying to build lives rose up to terrorize them. The Ku Klux Klan burned homes, attacked families, and destroyed crops. They wanted to make sure black families never felt safe, never gained power, never stood equal. The promise of 40 acres had been broken by the government, but white terror tried to bury the dream forever. Still, some fought back. There were black farmers who saved every penny, bought small plots of land, and built their futures piece by piece. Some formed all-black towns, places of pride and independence. Places where the memory of Sherman's promise lived on. But these victories were rare, and they were often crushed by laws, violence, or unfair taxes. The majority of black families were left behind, paying the heavy price of what America stole. Generational wealth, the ability to pass down land, money, and opportunity was the true prize of the 40 acres. White families had it. Black families were denied it. And that denial did not stop in the 1800s. It followed every generation. By the 1900s, most black families still owned little or no land. By the 2000s, studies showed the average white family held 10 times the wealth of the average black family. The roots of that gap go back to 1865. Back to the lie. Back to the betrayal. Think of what those 40 acres could have meant. A black family could have grown cotton, corn, or rice. They could have sold crops, bought tools, built homes, sent children to school. By the second generation, they could have owned more land, opened stores, and created businesses. By the third generation, they could have passed down wealth that grew stronger with time. Instead, they passed down poverty. Not because they were lazy. Not because they were weak. But because America had stolen their chance before it began. The price of broken promises is not only measured in dollars. It is measured in dignity. It is measured in years of struggle, in lives cut short, in dreams denied. The 40-acre lie taught black families one cruel lesson: in America, freedom was never free. And yet, the memory of the promise refused to die. Even as black families faced poverty and terror, they remembered. They remembered that once, for a short moment, the land had been theirs. That America itself had admitted they deserved it. The government may have taken the land back, but it could not erase the truth: black families were owed. The betrayal created poverty. But it also created a question that America could not escape. If the promise was broken, what is still owed? That question will grow louder in the years ahead. It will echo through marches, speeches, and demands for justice. It will haunt the conscience of America. The 40 acres may have been stolen, but the debt remained. And soon, a new generation would rise to remind the nation of what it had promised and what it had taken away. Close your eyes and imagine this. A black family in 1865 loses their promised 40 acres. They are pushed off the land, left with nothing. They enter poverty. Now imagine their children in 1900. Still poor. Still working someone else's fields. Jump to their grandchildren in 1950. Segregation surrounds them. They live in crowded neighborhoods, not because they want to, but because America closed its doors. And now look at their great-grandchildren in the 2000s. They still fight to buy homes, still fight for fair loans, still fight for wealth that was stolen more than a century ago. This is how the lie of 40 acres lived on. The betrayal of 1865 did not stay in 1865. It walked forward. It grew stronger. It planted roots so deep that generations could not escape. Because when land was stolen from black families, wealth was stolen. And when wealth was stolen, opportunity was stolen. And when opportunity was stolen, futures were stolen. This was not just one broken promise. It was a chain reaction, a wound that bled through time. By the 20th century, the wound of the 40 acres had spread into every part of black life. Without land, many black families had no property to pass to their children. No savings. No safety net. When the Great Depression struck in the 1930s, black families suffered the hardest. They had no land to farm for food. No bank accounts to protect them. Many had only labor to sell, and jobs were scarce. Meanwhile, white families who had inherited land or property could survive. Some even grew stronger. The wound widened. Then came the 1940s and 1950s, years when America called itself the land of opportunity. The government created housing programs, low-interest loans, and a booming middle class. But those programs were not for everyone. Banks and real estate companies used a system called redlining. They drew red lines around black neighborhoods on maps and declared them too risky. That meant black families were denied loans, denied mortgages, denied the chance to buy homes in better areas. Even veterans who fought for America in World War II returned home to face closed doors. The GI Bill promised help with education and housing, but black soldiers were often cut off from those benefits. So once again, America gave with one hand and took away with the other. The 40-acre lie had only changed shape. By the 1960s, the civil rights movement fought to break down these walls. Leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke about more than just equality under the law. They spoke about economic justice. King himself said, "America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds." He was not only talking about broken promises in his time. He was reaching back to 1865 to the 40 acres that never came. The echoes of the lie continued into the late 20th century. Black families often lived in neighborhoods with underfunded schools. Without land or wealth, they struggled to pay for higher education. Job opportunities were harder to reach. Generational poverty was passed down, not by choice, but by design. Everywhere, the ghost of the 40-acre promise could be seen. Even in the 21st century, the numbers told the story. The average white family held about 10 times more wealth than the average black family. Homeownership, one of the most common ways to build wealth, was much higher among white Americans than black Americans. These numbers were not accidents. They were not coincidences. They were the direct result of land stolen, wealth denied, and promises broken. And yet, the dream never died. Across generations, black communities kept building. They built churches that became centers of strength. They built businesses, schools, and cultural movements. They created music, art, and voices that shook the world. Even without 40 acres, they carved out dignity, power, and pride. But the wound still remained. Because while culture and spirit could not be taken, land and wealth had been stolen. This was the true echo of the 40-acre lie. It was not only about the land of 1865. It was about every home never built. Every farm never passed down. Every opportunity denied, decade after decade. It was about how a promise stolen in the past still shaped the present. And yet, the story was not finished. Because if the wound echoed through generations, so did the question, what does America still owe? By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, that question began to rise again. Politicians, activists, and everyday people started to demand answers. The echoes of betrayal had become too loud to ignore. But if America owed a debt, could it ever pay it? Or would the 40-acre lie remain a wound with no end? That was the question the nation would face next. Picture a courtroom. On one side sits America, a nation built on freedom, wealth, and dreams. On the other side sit generations of black families, carrying centuries of loss. Between them lies one question: what is still owed? This question is not new. It began in 1865, when America promised land and freedom and then snatched it away. It grew louder in the 1900s, when black families were locked out of housing, loans, and wealth. And now, in the 21st century, it stands as a shadow over the nation. The debt of the 40-acre lie has never been paid. The promise was clear: 40 acres and a mule. Enough land for each family to live, farm, and build a future. Had America kept that promise, today's story would be different. Black families might hold millions of acres. Generational wealth might flow through their hands. But instead, the promise was broken. Land was stolen. Futures were stolen. And the cost of that theft is still alive. By the 2000s, reports showed the truth in numbers. The average white family's wealth was 10 times greater than the average black family's. Homeownership among black Americans lagged far behind. Access to loans and credit remained harder. These were not accidents of history. They were the direct result of promises broken in 1865. Every dollar lost, every home denied, every acre stolen created a chain of inequality that reached into the present. But the story of the debt is not only about numbers. It is about dignity. The 40-acre promise was not just about land. It was about respect. It was about saying to a people once enslaved, "You belong. You matter. You have a place here." By breaking that promise, America told another story instead: you will always be less. That wound has never healed. So the question rises again, what does America owe? Some call it reparations, repayment for centuries of slavery, land theft, and discrimination. Reparations could mean money. It could mean land. It could mean investment in schools, housing, and communities. Others argue against it, saying the past is the past. But the past is not gone. The 40-acre lie still lives in today's poverty, today's wealth gap, today's inequality. A broken promise does not disappear just because time passes. Leaders across history have raised this issue. In the 1960s, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of a bad check that America gave black people, a check marked insufficient funds. He meant that America promised freedom but never delivered the tools to make it real. In the 1980s and 1990s, activists continued the call, demanding recognition of the stolen wealth. And in recent years, the debate has grown louder. Cities and states have begun to study reparations. Some universities have admitted their role in slavery and offered repayment. The question has returned to the national stage: if America made a promise, when will it keep it? But beyond politics, beyond laws, there is a deeper truth. The debt is not just about money. It is about trust. When a nation breaks its promise, it breaks the bond with its people. And until that bond is repaired, the wound remains open. Black families have carried that wound for over 150 years. They have carried it through slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, discrimination, and silence. They survived. They built culture, power, and pride despite everything. But survival does not erase the debt. Imagine if the promise had been kept. Imagine black families in 1865 starting with land, passing it to their children, then their grandchildren. Imagine the wealth, the businesses, the security that could have grown. Now imagine what was lost. That loss is the measure of America's debt. And here is the truth: debts do not vanish just because they are ignored. They grow. They wait. They echo through time until someone pays them. The 40-acre lie is America's unpaid debt. So what happens next? Some say America will never pay. That the lie will remain a scar forever. Others believe the debt can still be faced. That through reparations, through justice, through truth, America can finally admit its crime and take the first step toward healing. One thing is certain: the question will not die. Because every generation asks it again. Every protest, every march, every voice that rises for justice is the echo of 1865, demanding, where are the 40 acres? Where is the promise? The story of the 40-acre lie is not only about the past. It is about today. It is about tomorrow. It is about whether America can face its truth. The land was promised. The land was stolen. The debt remains. And until that debt is faced, America will never be free.